It's time for First Shift with Tony Trupiano.
Good morning, everybody. I am Tony Trupiano. Hour 2 of this Monday morning program. The weather's given us a little relief. Our government has not. And we continue to talk about all issues that affect you and I on a daily basis. Front and center, the Republicans want to drag this country down. We are going to talk about that in greater detail throughout this entire hour. Now, we're going to come at it from two different perspectives. One of them at the statewide level with a group called ALEC. We'll get to that in just a moment. And, of course, the ongoing debate and controversy that has been created by the Tea Party members of the Republican Party and this Republican Congress that refuses to negotiate in good faith. Now, we've got our First Shift Facebook poll question of the day that we want to get to. The UAW opens up contract negotiations today with the Big Four. That would be GM, Chrysler, Ford, and the state of Michigan. Will the UAW win back some concessions from past contracts and begin to slow the process, process back to giving workers their due? So if you go to the First Shift Facebook page, which I need you to like as well, go ahead and answer the poll question of the day. All right, as we have been anticipating now for some time, let me get to our first guest in this hour. And joining me now is Bruce Fealk. Any of you that listen to the show on a regular basis know that Bruce is not only a regular listener and contributor by calling in, he is also the editor of the Rochester Citizen. You're going to find them on Facebook at the Rochester Citizen. Also, the RochesterCitizen.com. He's here today because he has been almost single-handedly become the Michigan source expert on the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. That's ALEC.org. And since we last spoke to Bruce as a guest on this show, this organization is getting much more attention. So, Bruce Fealk, I want to welcome you back to First Shift, and thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Tony. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate it. This is important stuff. Bruce, for those that aren't familiar with ALEC, let's just give them a brief overview of what ALEC is.
Well, basically, it's a membership organization. The members are, they have 2,400 state legislative members around the country who pay $50 a year to be members. Some of them are on these what they call legislative task forces. They have 9 legislative task forces that deal with different issues. If you go to the ALEC.org website, you'll see the 9 initiatives that they have. And then on the other side of their membership list, you have corporate members, everyone from Pharma, Walmart, Exxon, you name it. If there's a big business segment, they're there at the table talking with ALEC legislative members about what kind of legislation to put forward.
And how long has ALEC been around, Bruce?
Well, they've actually been around for a long time. 1973, a gentleman named Paul Weyrich, who I encourage your, W-E-Y-R-I-C-H, I encourage your listeners to go to the YouTubes and find his pretty famous video now where he talks about not wanting everyone to vote. He just wants the right people to vote.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's exactly what he says. Now, of course, they've been around since 73, so I find it interesting that here in the year 2011, they're getting more attention than they've ever had. Bruce, do you know why that is?
Well, a good guess. I'm not sure 100%, but here's a good guess. I was doing some research over the weekend in preparation for talking to you this morning, and in this last election cycle, 2010, there's now 20 states across the country that have what they call a trifecta. And what that means is that where the Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the governorship. So what you're seeing across the country, I did a presentation to the Waterford Democrats about this last week, and so what you're seeing across the country is, many more. It isn't a coincidence that these right-wing, pretty radical pieces of legislation are being introduced on a national basis in the state legislatures. So it's a lot easier, obviously, if you have ALEC involved, ALEC members or ALEC corporate members introducing legislation at the task forces. They had their task force meeting in April in Cincinnati, and so that's just a partial membership coming together. And then, so you're seeing these bills being, whether it's voter ID, whether it's affecting workers' rights, privatizing schools. There's a whole host of bills. that are being introduced on a national basis through the state legislatures.
Well, it's interesting because as you do more and more homework on this, and it's ALEC.org, and we're also, before we get out of here today, going to give you some resources to combat what you might find at ALEC.org. They are a fairly secretive organization, Bruce, in that they don't really say who their members are. They even go as far as to say, and in fact, I believe her name was Reagan
Weber.
Reagan Weber, wouldn't necessarily say, there's no membership list, but they go as far as to say that there are Democrats that are members of ALEC. And I'm not saying there aren't, Bruce, because I don't know and you don't know. But the bottom line is they don't want you to know who their members are for some reason.
Well, that's true. And, Reagan told me that a third of their membership legislative members are Democrats. And everyone that has done any research on this group cannot confirm that. And I don't know if Reagan's going to be listening to this, but I would challenge Reagan to get on your show and talk to you about their membership. And I have her cell phone number if you want to give her a call later.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely do that, Bruce, and we will try to get her on this show. Because we do need to be concerned. And in fact, you live, and I want to, first of all, I want to thank you for, Bruce was responsible for getting me out to the Drinking Liberally crowd in Rochester last week, although I was quite delayed. You guys were all very patient. I enjoyed myself a great deal, Bruce, so thank you for inviting me and would like to come visit you again. But, you happen to live in a district where, there's a guy by the name of Tom McMillan, which is a name, unfortunately, this audience will hear a lot about. Bruce, he happens to be your state representative, correct?
Yes, he does. And it's funny because there's been so much attention being paid to ALEC. There's probably been 50 articles in some pretty major pieces of journalism done in the Nation. The Nation's probably done 6 to 10 articles. It's been on Huffington Post. It's been everywhere except, I think, the networks. And Tom has introduced these 3 bills that I found because, I think you mentioned, you referred to already, but there was a big change 2 weeks ago now, maybe 10 days ago. There was a big development, and we actually have access now to over 800 of what they call pieces of model legislation. And I was able to actually compare bills that Tom McMillan has introduced to bills that I think he got, it's obvious he got directly off the ALEC website. And in one case, it was word for word. It was a resolution to withdraw from the Midwest Greenhouse Gas Reduction Accord, word for word from the ALEC website. Another bill involved, I think it was Bill 4453, if I'm not mistaken, and that compares very closely. They don't always go word for word, but it compares very closely to a bill that came off of the ALEC website that prevents government from competing in any arena where there is possibly a private entity that might be able to do something, and including private prisons is a big one.
Well, it's interesting because we say there's this model legislation, this templated legislation. Somebody's got to be writing it. If the membership's only meeting a couple times a year, well, it can't be the membership, Bruce, because that's not enough time to write legislation. So who do you think's writing this legislation?
Well, they actually come to, like I started at the top of this segment, is they actually come together. They came together this year in Cincinnati. That's where the representatives of the corporations come together with the legislators, and that's where they decide on which model legislation they're going to put forward to their general membership. And it should be pointed out too that even though there's been some pushback from a guy named Noble Ellington, who's the national legislative chair for ALEC. He's saying, well, the legislators are the ones that put forward the legislation. Well, that's true. They do have to be the ones to take it back to the states. But when it's in these legislative committees at ALEC, the corporations actually have veto power over which legislation, and the language that gets put into the model legislation that they put forward. And while it's true that it does have to go to the legislature if these ALEC members are in leadership positions, as it does happen to be that there's a woman in the Senate. Her name is Tanya Schutemaker, who I've been on her Facebook page. She's the state chair for Michigan. And, so they have a lot of power when you have these trifectas where the one party, the Republican Party in this case, has control over all 3 branches of government. you can have these radical bills being put forward and actually passing and getting to the governors for signature, obviously.
Yeah, and these folks at ALEC are just salivating. Very quickly before we get to break here, Bruce, the Speaker of the House, Jace Bolger, announced this past Friday that they're going to be cutting the staffs of every legislative office in the state of Michigan. And, this is a cost-saving move. ALEC feels that, part of where they can really help fill some holes is understanding that, these people are short-staffed, and, of course, it requires less staff if you can go ahead and get templated legislation, Bruce. I mean, it's just that simple. And so,
when I talked with Reagan Weber, their communications director, she actually said, they actually take the case, and this is interesting too. ALEC is a 501c3.
Real quick, we got to get. You know what, Bruce? Hold that thought.
Okay,
we got to get to the
side.
break. Absolutely. See, he's even talking like a radio guy. He's going to talk on the other side. Absolutely, and we will do that. Bruce Fealk is my guest. We're talking about ALEC. If you go to the First Shift Facebook page, there's a link directly to their website. Stuff you need to know. I'm Tony Trupiano. We'll punch back in after this break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Tony Trupiano with you. My guest, Bruce Fealk with the Rochester Citizen. Again, the rochestercitizen.com is the website. And we're talking about ALEC again at the First Shift Facebook page. We've got a link to their website. We're going to also talk about a new website that is trying to combat what's happening over at ALEC as well. Bruce, before the break, we were talking about, one of the benefits to being a member is if you're short-staffed, well, having ALEC as a, part of your repertoire is kind of like having a new staff member.
Well, that's what they claim. When I talk with Reagan Weber, she tries to explain, these poor legislators, some of them are part-timers, some of them are new, and all we do is, we just educate them. And we bring them to, these meetings. In fact, like I said, there's a meeting in New Orleans coming up August, I think, 3rd through 6th or 1st through 6th, and they're going to have probably 2,000 legislators from all over the country there. And a lot of them are getting, number one, their memberships are paid for by public funds. And number two is they get what they call scholarships, where the ALEC actually pays their way to go down to these meetings. And that's I would put that in the category of maybe even being considered a bribe in some instances. So it's pretty serious stuff.
Well, Bruce, it does make one wonder, because when we look at what ALEC stands for, and this is information that you've provided for me, and I'm just going to read some of this stuff, and then we can come back and talk about it. Starving state government of revenue to make it dysfunctional and despised, transforming government for the public good into government incorporated, race to the bottom in wages for Americans, defunding traditional supporters of the Democratic Party, disenfranchising Democratic voters, federalism, hypocrisy. Now, these are just bullet points, but, Bruce, it points out a destructive path for what, most of us, and I would even think Republicans for the most part, feel are part of our history and our tradition. This whole thing we talk about at the federal level of there being this lack of compromise, and yet ALEC seems hell-bent, Bruce, on breaking the back of the American system.
Oh, they absolutely do, and a big part of what they're doing. I mean, you've probably read about these different voter ID bills across the country, and that's a big part of what ALEC is doing. In fact, I saw a video over the weekend. A young man in Wisconsin went to the Department of Motor Vehicles with his mother, and they were requiring a bank statement, and not just a bank statement, and he had to show activity, and it had to be sufficient activity on his bank statement in order to get a voter ID to be able to vote.
Whoa! Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. I have the video. I may have even put it up on your Facebook page.
Wow. I mean, this is just the kind of stuff that'll blow one's mind. Now, we go back. We go back to this 2,400 members. We'll do the simple math: $50 a member. That's not enough to fund them. So we have to go back to these corporations, which include, you mentioned some earlier: Bayer, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Walmart, Kraft, Coca-Cola, State Farm, Johnson & Johnson, AT&T, and the list goes on and on and on. They're obviously donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to this ALEC organization. in order to continue to fund the destruction of the American lifestyle.
Well, they absolutely are. And I know before we get to the end of our segment, I just want to make sure your listeners get some information so they can do their own research, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to make sure your listeners go to alecexposed.org. That's where the 800 pieces of model legislation are right now, and it's all been commented by the Center for Media and Democracy. And also, there will be some protests at the national meeting down in New Orleans, and that website is protestalec.org. So I just want to make sure I got that in there before the end of the
No, that's fine, Bruce. Do you plan on going to New Orleans for that convention?
I do. I've already got my flight booked and a hotel room, so I'm going.
All right. Well, and then we'll make sure that while you're there, we check in with you on a daily basis if you're available to do that.
Well, unfortunately, it's on a Friday. Actually, we can talk maybe early Friday morning. The actual protest is on Friday morning, August 5th. But the protest is actually after your show is over, so maybe we can talk on Monday.
Yeah, but what now? Does the conference only last the weekend, or does it go through the week?
It starts, I think, I'm not sure the exact dates.
All right, well, we'll worry about that then some other time. But we'll certainly focus on this. You know, you'd made a comment that was kind of interesting a little earlier. We know that Ed Schultz has talked about ALEC. We know Tom Hartman has talked about ALEC on television now. We know The Nation. We know that Bill Maher's talked about ALEC. But the major networks have not spoken of ALEC in any way, shape, or form. Now, it would seem to me that this is a big story, that the cables certainly have got it covered. Respected national magazines seem to have this story covered. And do you want to take a guess at why the mainstream media is staying away from it?
Well, you know, I would guess that, well, there's probably two reasons. Either they're members, because they have a vested interest in probably, you know, legislation that would affect media consolidation, things like that. Or they obviously, the who's who of people that we read off that are corporate members are their advertisers. So you can imagine what would happen if they started doing really heavy-duty stories against, let's say, AT&T, who probably spends, you know, tens of millions of dollars advertising, let's say, mobile phone service on ABC. So you can imagine if all of a sudden there started to be major stories about ALEC and everything we've been talking about on the major networks. Yeah,
this is pretty incredible stuff. Just so people understand, I asked Bruce to, send me some information, and he could have sent me enough. I'm telling you, we could have done a whole week's worth of stuff on ALEC alone. And I really do, Bruce, want to encourage people to go to the ALEC website. Again, we've got it up on the Facebook page. We'll put the alecexposed.org up as well. I want people to just do a little homework on their own. We can't rely on Bruce to do it all for us, folks. But more than anything, Bruce, I want people to understand what's at stake here, because we don't know how many Republicans in the state of Michigan are a member of ALEC. But we do know two for sure. And I'm going to make a guess that the majority, if not all of the Republicans serving in the State House and the State Senate have some ties to ALEC. I would be surprised if they didn't.
Well, actually, we do. If you go to the ALEC Exposed website, they do list out the members that they're aware of by state. So we can actually see who the members, in the state of Michigan are. And in fact, I saw a video this morning of some Minnesotan people that went into their legislative, their legislator's office, and they were asking him. Just the only question was, "Are you a member of ALEC?" And they got kicked out of his office. He didn't want to answer the question.